multi-summit pilgrimage to see the Pope. This is the CBS Evening News. Dan Rather reporting tonight from this magnificent vantage point in front of St. Peter's Basilica. Good evening. All roads lead to Rome. For Mikhail Gorbachev, it has been a long and winding road, one full of obstacles. But he is here now, first to nurture his new relations with Italy and the West, and then to do something no Soviet leader has ever done, ask for the blessing of the Pope.
Gorbachev became the first Soviet Communist Party chief to make an official visit to Italy today. The country's fading Communist Party papered the streets of Rome to welcome him, and thousands of other people stood outside in winter's chill to cheer. Thousands of the best security police from both nations also were on hand. Gorbachev stayed in the public eye most of the day, laying a wreath at the tomb of Italy's unknown soldier at the Piazza Venezia. Later, noisy fans and celebrity thrill seekers trailed the Soviet leader and his wife Raisa as they toured the ancient city sights. And Gorbachev plunged into the crowd in his characteristic campaign style. Across Rome, the Pope was not about to be upstaged. At his Wednesday audience, which we were privileged to attend, the Holy Father clearly signaled his pleasure with the reforms sweeping Eastern Europe now. To those who had traveled from Czechoslovakia, the Pope was pointed. Build a new future, he said, based on your Christian culture and your inalienable rights. He knows that this is his moment.
This is such a momentous day.
Gorbachev's desire to meet with the Pope is part of a larger agenda.
The political purpose is to dramatize the Soviet Union's determination to re-enter the mainstream of Western civilization and politics. The economic agenda is to dramatize or emphasize the fact that Italy has maintained its economic relationship with the Soviet Union over the years.
The Soviet leader desperately needs to save money fast on defense, and today the Prime Minister of Czechoslovakia went on his nation's television to call for negotiations with the Kremlin aimed at a total withdrawal of Soviet troops. And tonight, in a dinner toast to his Italian hosts, Gorbachev spoke of the new Europe, including Russia, offering the hope that one day soon the NATO and Warsaw Pacts will be transformed from military alliances into tools of cooperation. Gorbachev said, quote, "The Cold War is ending. There can be no winners, no losers."
Joining me now is CBS News Moscow Bureau Chief Barry Peterson, who's here covering the Gorbachev pilgrimage. Barry, some people say that for Gorbachev, this meeting with the Pope is even more important than the Malta summit meeting with President Bush coming up this weekend.
Dan, I think that's certainly true, and especially in the Soviet Union. Think for a moment, in one brief meeting, Gorbachev is going to take 70 years of communist and Bolshevik dogma, and he's going to turn it upside down. It was the communist who sought to break the Russian soul in two, to separate the intellect from the heart. Religion corrupts the mind, proclaimed Stalin. The state must liberate people from such superstition, he decreed. His solution was simple. But these days, it is the churches that are being rebuilt and reborn. It is communism that is in danger of crumbling. Communism, said Marx, is going to march across the world. But it is the priests who are on the move across the Soviet Union, opening new churches every day. Make them into communists while they are young, said Lenin. But the young are seen more and more in the churches. It is, say observers, a shrewd Mikhail Gorbachev who is letting religion of all kinds once again flourish across this land. And a shrewd Gorbachev who is making a pilgrimage to the Eternal City, seeking to establish relations with the Vatican and seeking the approval of the Pope. By doing this, Gorbachev is reaching out to those in his own society who were once killed for their beliefs, who were now needed to bring fresh support for his faltering perestroika. And as the hardline governments of Eastern Europe fall to the forces of reform, Gorbachev also knows that the growing clamor for religious freedom across the Soviet Union is something he dare not stop. This land of the self-proclaimed faithless now needs the faithful for another reason. It is going broke, and people may soon be going hungry. Gorbachev is shopping for help.
What he gets out of this is an improved relationship with the West. And that improved relationship in the West may very well translate into support for economic concessions to the Soviet state.
Gorbachev's meeting with the Pope sends a message to the world that the Soviet Union is breaking through the shell of official atheism. And Gorbachev sends a message to his own people that a communist leader can be tolerant when practical politics dictates. One other thing, Dan, this is going to play beautifully in Europe. Gorbachev is going to replace the image of the evil Soviet bear with the man who can go and shake hands with the Pope. It's going to knock him flat.
Thanks, Barry. Coming up next on the CBS Evening News, Bob Schieffer in New York with some of the day's other developments. Then we'll be back from here in Rome with more on the story of communism and religion. God and Gorbachev.
Affluent neighborhoods, and this time the homes of American diplomats were in the combat zone. Our chief White House correspondent Leslie Stahl begins our coverage.
The rebel attack centered on the San Salvador neighborhood where many U.S. Embassy officials live. The fighting was so intense it forced the U.S. Embassy to close down. Rebels burned a mansion just blocks away from the American ambassador's residence and destroyed the home of another American official.
It is our belief that all United States personnel and their families are safe, but several are in their homes in this area of heavy fighting. The FMLN has essentially turned to terrorism. Their targets are really not the Salvadorian army. Their targets are embassies, hotels, the homes of private citizens.
Despite assurances from Soviet officials that they are not involved in the continued shipments of weapons to the rebels, Secretary Baker accused the Russians of throwing fuel on the fire.
It appears that old thinking or old behavior, more appropriate to Brezhnev than Gorbachev, guide Soviet policy towards some important regional conflicts.
President Bush tonight greeted Canadian Prime Minister Brian Mulroney, who met with Gorbachev just last week. The assault in El Salvador comes on the eve of Mr. Bush's departure for the Superpower Summit in Malta, where he's expected to challenge Gorbachev on the Soviets' continued involvement in Central America.
Soviet behavior in Central America remains the biggest obstacle to an across-the-board improvement in United States-Soviet relations.
The French newspaper Le Monde reports that after a stormy meeting yesterday with Soviet diplomats, Nicaraguan and Cuban officials agreed to halt the shipment of weapons to the rebels. The White House, unaware of that meeting, says if it's true, it's a positive development. Leslie Stahl, CBS News, the White House.
Continued fighting in the well-to-do neighborhoods where Americans live has prompted the Bush administration to start bringing home the families of U.S. government employees. This despite statements by senior U.S. officials that the rebels pose no real threat to the government of El Salvador.
All that they're doing is making a symbolic and important statement about their ability to keep causing trouble.
The rebels claim U.S. personnel are not military targets. Nevertheless, the fighting has come too close for comfort.
The withdrawal covers about 250 family members. Those who want to stay can, but those who want to get out will depart El Salvador by commercial airliner over the next several days. David Martin, CBS News, the Pentagon.
At the Los Angeles airport today, U.S. Customs officials seized a piece of luggage before it was loaded onto a jetliner bound for Colombia. X-rays showed what appeared to be 3 sticks of dynamite inside. Police took the suitcase away and blew it up, only to discover it wasn't a bomb after all, just a Nintendo video game. Russian gymnast Nadia Comaneci, the darling of the 1976 Montreal Olympics, has fled to Hungary, where she's asked permission to live. As a 14-year-old, Comaneci won 3 Olympic gold medals as she received unprecedented perfect scores. She says Romania has denied her permission to work or to travel abroad. In Washington today, the Supreme Court returned to the abortion controversy, hearing arguments in 2 cases that could put new restrictions on young teenagers who don't want to notify their parents before getting an abortion. Our law correspondent Rita Braver has our report.
Heather Pearson and Missy Larson still remember how they felt as pregnant teenagers determined to get abortions. How they felt when they learned that both of their parents must be notified unless they could get special permission from a judge.
To me, it was like, you know, it was really embarrassing. It was humiliating.
They're trying to discourage kids from having abortions, trying to make it like that's wrong.
The legislature decided that parents were the ones who were best able to know what the minor's needs, both emotional, physical, moral, whatever, are.
The court has previously decided that states can require that parents be notified in most cases before minors have abortions. But the issue today is what happens when states have laws that may be too strict. The cases came from Ohio, which requires that a girl offer a judge clear and convincing evidence that she could suffer emotional or mental harm from telling her parents, and Minnesota, where a girl must get a special judicial waiver to avoid informing both biological parents, even in cases like Heather's. She hadn't seen her father in years.
What I remember of him was he was an alcoholic. He would hit my mom, he would hit his kids, and I was afraid of him.
The 2-parent rule seemed to trouble Justice Sandra Day O'Connor, who worried that it just doesn't provide for any exceptions, even when telling a parent isn't in the child's best interest. But the Deputy Attorney General of Minnesota insisted that biological parents have rights and responsibilities in decisions involving their children. And the lawyers for both Minnesota and Ohio argued that states are not even required to give minors any opportunity to bypass parental notification.
The states have the authority to put into place laws and regulations that further the parents' rights.
We're saying that minor women, like other women, have a right to privacy and a constitutional right to abortion.
The Bush administration urged the court to use this issue as an opportunity to overturn the broad right to abortion granted in the landmark Roe versus Wade case.
But the Supreme Court is not expected to use this issue to overturn Roe versus Wade. Nevertheless, the decisions in these cases are expected to lead to further restrictions on the right to abortion. Rita Braver, CBS News, Cleveland Heights, Ohio.
Also today, the Supreme Court temporarily blocked the execution of Dalton Prejean in order to hear an emergency appeal. He was scheduled to die in the Louisiana electric chair shortly after midnight for a murder he committed as a juvenile more than a decade ago. The Justice Department announced late today that Shell Oil Company will pay a record $19.7 million settlement. This for the major oil spill into San Francisco Bay in April of 1988. The Air Force today named 6 states for deployment of the railroad-based version of the MX nuclear missile. The missiles will go to bases in Louisiana, Texas, Washington State, North Dakota, Arkansas, and Michigan. The MX missiles are to be hidden on moving railroad cars to make them harder to find in case of war. Federal grand jury met in Birmingham, Alabama today, reportedly to investigate charges that the Thiokol Corporation has failed to make proper inspections of space shuttle parts since the 1986 Challenger disaster. Federal officials refused to comment, but a spokesman for Thiokol confirms that the company was asked to provide information about instruments on the shuttle's redesigned rocket boosters. Well, that's it from here. In a moment, more from Dan Rather in Rome.
It's easy to get lost in a storm. You may have been lost in this one. Your medical records, your bank statements. Vital information gone in a flash because it wasn't protected. So 3M invented data cartridge technology, a unique data backup system that protects your information. Because for someone to help you, they have to be able to find you. 3M, innovation working for you.
It may be Red Lobster's most perfect meal. Petite Danish lobster tails. Mmm, the sweetest ever. Plus flame-broiled shrimp. Delicious. Next, oh, sizzling scampi. All this lobster and shrimp on one plate. Perfectly priced. Just $8.95 for a few weeks.
Red Lobster for the seafood lover in you.
And for the holidays, call for party platters to go. Ready in just 1 hour.
I don't want a few aches and pains to stop me from doing the things I truly love to do. You know, like planting a rose bush or throwing the ball with my grandson. But I do have occasional aches and pains. That's why my good friend Bufferin is there when I need it for pain relief. Bufferin, my brand of aspirin, has strong 100% aspirin. It helps me to keep doing the things I want to do.
Bufferin, so you can do the things you want to do.
Friday's meeting here at the Vatican will be the first ever between a leader of the Soviet Union and a pope, but mark that it will be on the Church's turf and on the Church's terms. To be invited here, Gorbachev has had to go far in liberalizing Soviet policy toward the Church, and to win a return visit from the Pope, he will have to go even farther, much farther. From Lithuania, a cradle of Catholicism in the Soviet Baltic states, correspondent Peter Van Sant reports on the effects so far of Gorbachev's reforms.
In a country where the state considered religion a sin, an enemy to be destroyed, the remarkable sounds and sights of renewed religious freedom seem unbelievable, even to the believers. This past weekend in Soviet Lithuania, the dramatic turnaround in communist religious tolerance was celebrated as a once-banned Catholic youth organization reestablished itself after 50 years. Its name is The Future, and it will try to repair the damage of decades of Soviet atheistic teaching.
The rebirth of Christianity is real in our country. You yourself can see.
From the West came Pope John Paul's official blessing and aging former members exiled from their homeland years ago, beneficiaries of new freedoms as Mikhail Gorbachev seeks to win converts to his economic program.
I don't believe what's happening. The moral rebirth has started today at the Mass.
This celebration follows nearly 50 years of brutal suppression of the Catholic Church and all religious life in Lithuania. Many of those who remain loyal to the Church paid for their faith in blood. Lithuania had been a robust Catholic country for centuries before the Soviet Union forcibly took it over in 1940. What followed, first under Stalin and then Khrushchev, were decades of state terror, where any allegiance to Rome was viewed as treason. A symbol of the religious rebirth, Father Sigitas Tamkevičius, recently released from Siberian exile. Today is an extremely joyous and hopeful day in our lives, he says, but it's also a day that is filled with some fear and uncertainty.
We are oppressed, but not beaten.
Lithuania's religious spirit continues on a hillside in Vilnius. These three crosses were dynamited and buried by Soviet troops in 1951 during their holy war against the Church. Recently, residents dug them up, symbols of a faith which has been battered but not destroyed. Peter Van Sant, CBS News, Soviet Lithuania.
I'll be back with more news from here at St. Peter's Square in a moment. Jesus said, love your enemies. This week's meeting of Pope John Paul and Mikhail Gorbachev brings together two traditional enemies, both of whom have shown time and again that they can rise above the hatreds of history. On May 13th, 1981, John Paul, the Polish Pope, was shot right here in St. Peter's Square.
Mehmed Ali Acha, the Turkish gunman, said the assassination plot was devised by the Soviets, with Bulgarian secret police as middlemen.
I have been trained specially by KGB.
KGB?
Yes.
This is the very spot where the assassination was attempted. A Bulgarian-Soviet connection to the attempted murder was never proved in a court of law, but to the inner circle closest to the Pope and to those Catholics who know what it's like to live under communist rule, there was little doubt. Monsignor Ivan Dachko, a leader of the Ukrainian Catholic Church, says the Pope told the Polish people they didn't have to be afraid, that communism was bankrupt and they would prevail.
Everybody was convinced that Pope John Paul II was a very uncomfortable person or statesman for the Soviet authorities and for the Eastern European governments, so he had to be eliminated.
How many divisions does the Pope have? Was the way Joseph Stalin cynically dismissed the power of the Vatican. Stalin could never have foreseen what was to come, says Vatican spokesman Joaquin Navarro-Valls.
16 October 1978, something new, unexpected happened in the church and in the world.
Habemus Papam.
John Paul called himself a man from a faraway land. From the beginning, he felt his mission unique.
He knows what it means to live in an atheist society under an anti-religious system in a communist world, and how people have to struggle to pray, to confess their faith.
John Paul labored to give faith to that voice, not just in his own homeland, but throughout the communist world. And when Gorbachev came to power, the Pope finally had someone ready to listen. In 1988, the Soviets permitted believers to celebrate 1,000 years of Christianity in Russia. John Paul took a bold step, sending his Secretary of State with a personal letter to Gorbachev, laying out his terms for further dialogue. Gorbachev wrote back 1 year later, and the historic meeting was on.
There were times when we thought, well, we're dying, nobody wants to know anything about us, we're a desperate cause, and now suddenly everybody is willing to help us. Isn't this marvelous? This is a concrete sign that God guides history.
How much has the mood changed? Well, the Red Army finally did enter the Vatican recently, not to conquer, but to entertain. John Paul has become a symbol of hope to the faithful in Eastern Europe, a symbol of endurance and now triumph of the faith. The Pope begins each day in the quiet time before dawn, praying in his private chapel, alone. That's where he'll be Friday morning, alone in prayer, before he meets the leader of the Soviet Communist Party. The meeting, said one priest in Rome, is like the lion laying down with the lamb. But in this case, he said, it's hard to tell who's the lion and who's the lamb. And that's part of our world tonight. Dan Rather reporting from the Vatican. We'll be back here again tomorrow night to cover these historic events. See you then.
I'm Kathleen Sullivan. Tomorrow, Tommy Lasorda. He's won the bet for losing 30 pounds, and the money's all going to charity. Also, Olympia Dukakis and the Moody Blues on CBS This Morning.
This is CBS.